corporate landlords just owning everything in America, individual landlords disappearing.
All these corporate companies are buying up real estate. Rents are getting super high. Corporations are buying up a ton of real estate. Then I also, started to do some research and look up BlackRock, and they're buying everything. So it's crazy that all these corporate companies are buying up real estate.
So listen to this. Blackstone has been aggressively ramping up its bet on U.S. rental housing.
Almost impossible for people to rent when they're making decent money, but also it's impossible to buy.
It's almost like the American dream is becoming the American nightmare.
Corporate landlords just owning everything in America, individual landlords disappearing, people not having to pay their rent. So then a lot of these landlords have to sell their properties. And then, who comes in and buys them? BlackRock or Blackstone, same thing, right? Blackstone buys 12,000 Sunbelt apartments for $5.8 billion. This is from Zero Hedge. Wall Street won't rest until it becomes the biggest and perhaps only landlord in the U.S. On Wednesday, Blackstone cemented its position as America's largest residential and commercial landlord by buying apartment owner preferred apartment communities in a deal valued at $5.8 billion, demonstrating the unstoppable investor demand for multifamily, i.e. rental properties in Sunbelt states. According to Wall Street Journal, Blackstone will pay $25 a share in cash for the Atlanta-based real estate investment trust. That represents a premium of roughly 39% over the closing price on February 9th, the day before Bloomberg News reported the REIT was exploring options, including a sale. So the deal includes more than 40 rental apartment properties, including 12,000 units in states including Florida, Tennessee, and Georgia. That's what they mean by Sunbelt. Preferred Apartment also owns 54 grocery-anchored shopping centers anchored by grocery stores, probably like Publix. About 70% of the deal's value is in its rental apartments. Wow. So Blackstone, now they're ramping up its bet on U.S. rental housing. Blackstone, I want you to think about it. This is fun.
So wow, that's absolutely insane. As I was looking at housing, one of the things I kept noticing, I'm like, who's actually buying all this stuff? Who has the money to buy it? I'm like, if you make multiple six figures and you're still getting priced out, who's buying it? And I think the answer is some I came across this Tim Dillon article that we're watching now. Then I also started to do some research and look up BlackRock, and they're buying everything. So it's crazy that all these corporate companies are buying up real estate. And so that kind of got me a little nervous to where I'm like, damn, I got to hurry up and buy to make sure that I don't get priced out or would never be able to buy a home. And it's actually funny. I was, I'm talking to, you're right here, Olivia. You and I were talking about, before we hit play, and you were talking about Vancouver and how it's absolutely impossible to even buy there because the international investors have already bought everything up. And based on this article, it seems like the same thing's happening in the U.S. just at a slower rate, but it's going to be a point where nobody can actually buy anything.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So where I'm from in Vancouver, ever since I was a kid, it's the price to buy a house is been skyrocketing and skyrocketing. But what's been happening there is there's lots of international buyers, but what it's doing is it's cutting out all the locals. And rent prices are increasing. My dad just moved, and the reason why he was moving was because his rent increased by $1,500 a month. And he was already paying a lot for a 2-bedroom apartment. So it's just these things with the rent prices, but also people buying up properties, it's making it almost impossible for people to rent when they're making decent money. But also it's impossible to buy. Someone like me who's 27, I can never imagine to buy in Vancouver. It just, for me, it's not a goal in my mind because I've already kind of thought, well, I'm already priced out. It's just not going to happen.
So, I wonder I don't know what's going to happen, because the way I think about stuff like this, I'm getting up to boomer age these days, or at least I think I am. And so I start thinking about 20 years from now, and I'm like, no matter how my work life goes, at some point you're unable to work anymore. And for most Americans, or most people in the world, like you're not going to be like, oh, I'm sitting on like a whole bunch of millions of dollars, right? And so ideally you would have your place paid for so that you wouldn't have any expenses outside of, doing like old lady and old man stuff, going to the grocery store, picking up groceries, going to the YMCA. I used to be a lifeguard. So you go to the YMCA, you see all the old people like doing like little calisthenics and the water ballerina stuff. If you're paying rent that can price hike, that could totally change your whole world. It makes it impossible. So, I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen, but that was just a big thing. I don't think we're going to solve it on this segment, but that's something to think about as you think about like your life plan. Like, what are you going to do in this housing market now that BlackRock is buying up all this property? Let's listen to this a little bit more.
So listen to this. Blackstone has been aggressively ramping up its bet on U.S. rental housing. The firm has agreed to buy 2 other companies that own apartments in the past 2 months, building up its presence in states including Colorado, Texas, Arizona, and Georgia. Well, what do they mean by that? Ramping up its bet on U.S. rental housing. Well, they're betting, and they're correct, that people are not going to be able to own homes, or that more people in the future are going to rent. This is their bet. And they're probably correct, because the cost of homeownership in this country is, ludicrous, especially in places where you'd want to live. So companies like Blackstone go, listen, the future is going to be the gig economy, where you have people that hop from gig to gig, and they're going to be permanent renters, and that's what it's going to be. They're not going to own property. They may not even own a car. They're going to use services like Uber and Lyft, and they're going to rent an apartment. They're not going to own much of anything. And according to that article, you're going to love it. You're going to be happy. And, the American dream is turning from home ownership and family to something else entirely. It's really what it's becoming. It used to be the American dream, as stated. Now, how possible it was, and whether it was legit then, certainly more legit seeming than now.
But I think it's absolutely insane to me. Even though, we're, like this segment's talking about real estate, it's almost like the American dream is becoming the American nightmare, because if you can only rent and you always have to put out money, how do you ever like retire if you're always on the treadmill? I think the goal for most people is to get off of the treadmill at some point, meaning like, hey, like I've lived a good life, I've saved, I've done some great things. I bought a house, I paid my house off. I'm gonna go live in Florida or Arizona, and I'm gonna just, like walk along the paths and ride my bike on Tuesday and go to the YMCA. Seems like that's not gonna be an option anymore. I don't know the solution of it, but just something that we got, like all of us need to think about. And I don't know if we're gonna solve it today. There's no answer. The fact that these big corporations are buying everything up. Anyway, on to the next segment. You guys get it. Corporations are buying up real estate and properties like right now. BlackRock's gonna own everything, and the only option is going to be to rent or pay an exorbitant amount of money. And the one thing I realized, like in my housing search, is that you will not compete and you will not win competing with corporations. You just won't. You're going to overpay for something and not have the money to do it and run out of budget. The amount of money you'll be spending on housing will not allow you to do anything else. So just a warning, something you need to think about.